Isn't it ironic, though, that we're having this conversation when talking about social media, like a technology that was designed to help us like form connections with each other.
Yeah, form real meaningful connections.
Right. And it's becoming the opposite. It's actually making us feel more isolated and driven further apart.
The specific language you use, though, isn't it amazing? I don't know if you remember this, but in Gaudium et Spes, the pastoral constitution from the Second Vatican Council, which is like probably 1965 or something, somewhere around there. They actually talk about how the world is becoming increasingly more connected, and yet people are feeling more alone and isolated. In the 60s.
1965.
I mean,
right.
That was like, what, 40 years before the internet?
Yeah.
I mean, it's wild.
Yeah.
That's prophetic.
Welcome to the In Spirit podcast from Amoris Christi. Join us as we explore current events and all manner of fascinating topics and explore their connections to Christian living.
All right, welcome everyone to another episode of the In Spirit podcast. Once again, joined by Chris and Father Thomas. Welcome back, guys, and good to have you guys with us again.
Good to be back.
How you guys been doing? How's your week?
Hanging in there.
Hanging in there.
Yeah. How about you, Anthony?
Yeah, last 2 weeks of our term system, so, this usual stuff, usual school stuff. But, yeah, I'm praying for our Holy Father, too, during these, as he's sick as well. So, yeah. Been good overall.
Nice.
So I thought today we'll talk about the topic of social media and youth mental health, or mental health in general. And it's something that all of us use in some way, shape, or form, social media. And just, looking at it and seeing its effects on us as a human person and, what should we make of it even, of social media. And so... yeah, I know, Chris, pretty active on social media. I myself use X or Twitter. Mm-hmm. And I know Father used X and Twitter as well. So all of us in some way have been using it. So I just thought we'll talk about it. So what do you guys, just some initial thoughts on social media?
Yeah, it might be worth thinking of the pros and cons we've each personally experienced using social media. I guess for myself, for benefits, I'll never forget somebody's birthday. So I guess that's a plus. Actually, that's not true. I still manage to forget people's birthdays. Yeah, having used social media a fair bit, and I think also having grown up with it, at least since probably like 9th grade, like around that time, 14, 15. It's definitely followed me up and down through life. I can think of times where I literally tried to get rid of all social media. I don't know if either of you ever tried, but I was like, I didn't even want to like do Facebook. And so I had deleted everything until eventually I realized it wasn't going to work, because you can't just ask people for their phone numbers and expect everyone to give it to you. So there is like in a general sense, even there's a usefulness that I've seen in my own life of just generally keeping networked. And I think network really is the word. It's not necessarily friends or community. It's my network. It's people I have contact with. I don't know.
Like LinkedIn?
Yeah. LinkedIn is just social media for professionals, right?
No, I agree. I think, it has... I remember growing up, and then Facebook came. And so I guess that's one good point, I think, that you were mentioning, that we probably have the advantage of we weren't born necessarily with social media growing up. It's probably later on when social media became a thing. So I guess, it's not probably like kids, how it is for kids now. They just grow up with it. So yeah, I think I remember using Facebook, and like you said, I completely agree. It was great to connect with people, or network with people, like you said, and especially, your school friends who, you haven't kept in touch with for years, and then, wherever they are in the world right now, you could find them and, network with them. And it has led to, even getting together, meeting them in person too. So yeah, definitely, I would say there was definite benefits to it. What about for you, Father? What do you...
Well, I think it's a broad term, social media, and they're all so different. I mean, I remember the first social media account that I had was with Friendster.
Wow.
Yeah, and that was such a thing. I mean, it was spreading around, and it was more. At least I felt like it was more. Like you had more conversations. I mean, even before that, you had all these chat rooms and things like that, and of course, discussion forums, and people were talking. They were communicating ideas or thoughts and all of that. So you got that, and then you have Facebook, where a lot of what you guys were talking about is sort of Facebook, I think.
Yeah.
You know, where you have the
A lot of
keep in
it
touch
definitely
with you.
started there. Yeah. Or I mean, there was MySpace, but
Yeah, there's MySpace. I mean,
Orkut.
but then when you start looking at Instagram, I think it changes a little bit, because the way that people use Instagram is that they just keep swiping from an image to another image to a video to another video.
doom
Yeah.
scrolling.
Isn't that right?
Right.
And then when you get to TikTok, it's just at a whole nother level where it's not even necessarily people that you know. I've never used TikTok, so correct me if I'm wrong, but it's not even necessarily people that you know, but it's just, video after video of entertaining things, funny things, cringe things, Is that fair?
Yeah, I think it's interesting to look at the way that social media has gradually evolved and continues to evolve. I mean, social media is a term that we kind of made up to describe this new kind of media as it's evolved. But as you said, like Facebook definitely was a turning point. MySpace, Facebook, like that era where it branched out into more than just having conversations. Then it became gradually more and more about seeing curated content.
Entertainment.
Yeah. And then Instagram took that a little bit further. Snapchat really was always more about keeping up with friends. I don't think that was in the same category. Twitter, I think, really helped get it to the next level. But then, of course, TikTok. And then there's been the TikTok effect on all the other platforms where a lot of the things that Instagram does now is sort of copycatting TikTok's model.
I see.
YouTube has tried to do the same thing with YouTube Shorts.
Right.
Yeah.
And
And people do the same thing with YouTube Shorts that they do with Instagram
Right.
too. Yeah.
Right.
But it's all around this idea of the algorithm of curated content. And
and that's what worries me. And
Yeah.
X is a totally different category because everything in X is meant for public discourse.
Right.
And that's basically what it's designed for. So they're all different, and you kind of have to treat them differently. But first of all, I'd like to say that as a software developer myself, I have great admiration and appreciation for these massive, incredible pieces of software. They're really, like when people build something like some massive structure, a bridge or a building, you're in awe, you're in amazement, or a cathedral.
We call it a feat of engineering because
yeah.
it's a feat.
Yeah, exactly. It's phenomenal. And I remember when Facebook was really like taking, they were winning, in other words, and everything else fell away basically because of Facebook. And one of the reasons for that was that they were so dynamic. They would constantly come up with new features. I don't know how they did it. I don't know how they maintained that kind of pace and creativity. So I have great appreciation for all of this. And I think that it's accomplished a lot, like you all have talked about. My one concern, and it's a very serious concern, is the algorithms, because I believe that they are hacking our brains, and especially the brains of teenagers, right? And that's a dangerous thing because, okay, look, everything hacks your brain. Every advertisement, every salesperson hacks your brain. They tell you what you want to hear. It captures your attention, and then next thing you know, you're spending money or whatever it is, right? Every commercial. And even commercials have been like fine-tuned for, Saturday afternoon, this channel, what age group, what demographic watches at this time? Let's give a commercial for that. All that's been there already. But this, because of its artificial intelligence and it's individualized and it's based on every single thing that you've watched and how many seconds have you watched this versus that versus what do you scroll past, and everything that you've written and the people that you talk to and your last name, and it can use all of that to calculate what is the thing that is going to keep you on there the longest.
Yeah. So
That to me is hacking your brain in a way that is no longer safe or acceptable.
Yeah, and I think when the Surgeon General put out his advisory, former Surgeon General Dr. Murthy put out his advisory, I think that was exactly what his point was as well, was that this adolescent age, ages 10 to 19, it's a critical age for your brain development, and really also you're learning risk rewards as well. And so when that's being shaped by social media, by what you're watching and scrolling, that then starts affecting your whole life in terms of what is risk, what is reward, and there's in one sense you're always now seeking that, okay, I want that instant gratification or that reward that you're sending, so we're always seeking that. So I think that was one of the risks, especially of using it among adolescents. So I agree with that. And
Yeah, no, I do as well. I think it's interesting. It's not one factor that's causing all this. It's more the combination of factors put together. It's the way that it's giving that dopamine kick, as you mentioned. It's the way that it's a vulnerable age group, teens and adolescents, young adults. It's also the way that, we also have to be honest too. Like these social media platforms are run by companies, and each company has to be profitable by selling a product. And I'll never forget, like, the product that social media companies sell is your information. Like, that's how they stay afloat. Not to say that they're like pawning off your information to some like nefarious group necessarily.
I don't think they're selling your information, but they're it's advertising.
It's their business model, right? Like, they're able to make a profit by making your information profitable. And that's accomplished through the algorithm, which then fuels the ad money, which all that kind of stuff. So, this is not like benevolent, disinterested, detached software engineers. Like, these are companies that are trying their best to keep you on their platform. And by and large, like, they have pretty free reign in doing it, which I think is what part of the concern is now. And of course, we'll get into all that.
Yeah, and that's why you need legislation, because you can't expect the corporation, you can be very optimistic, but realistically, the corporation, that's probably what they're going to do. They're going to optimize for getting the most amount of ad viewership, right? And everybody who advertises on there, they want the most ad viewership for their ads too. So that's going to be the natural course of things. But you probably need some legislation in general about like how much you can hack a person's brain. With AI, I think we're going to need that.
I guess on the maybe like another counterpoint, or not even a counterpoint, is that does social media provide young people or youth a place for their creative expression? And is that a potential advantage of using social media, that it becomes a place of creativity in today's age and world, or day and world?
I think yes. I think that, especially because the world has turned so tech-based, it is good that there's a creative outlet there for young people to take advantage of online. And I've made content before and really enjoyed it. I don't know though if we're going about it in quite the right way. See, like, the word you hear is content. We don't talk about art. Like, we don't talk about it as art or somebody's craft. Like, we'll use words like that. The word that you usually hear in the context of social media is content, which almost sounds weirdly industrial, like, but
consumeristic.
Very consumeristic, right? It's like, it's about making content. It's about and some people, the content they make is not even necessarily creative or artistic. It's like there's whole genres out there of just like people just making slop that they know people will watch in order to turn a profit. So it's not. So I would say yes, but it's not an unrestricted yes. I definitely think that we need a more serious examination of like how do we like approach this in general? And I also think to take it a step further, how do we train or educate or accompany people on an individual level to use their talents in a place like social media?
Yeah. Yeah, I guess even in that sense of creativity and self-expression, it wouldn't make sense for an adolescent or, a person growing up to then use that as their method of, expressing creativity, right? Well, I guess my question is like, is this like filmmaking? Is this like photography,
I think I've seen it that it can be at its best.
Yeah.
But of course the issue is how do you both account for the best and the worst? Because there are some people out there who are seriously talented and make amazing stuff. They've been able to launch whole careers.
Yeah, that's true. Even though that's a great minority of users.
Of course.
Yeah. I mean, so the vast majority of people are passive, and I think increasingly so, increasingly more passive. They are consumers of content.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's problematic. Because then it's again, it's like TV, but it's more addictive than TV. You're just sitting there kind of watching, for hours on end.
It's the instant gratification factor, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and we've seen how it's, and I'm sure this came up in the Surgeon General study, but the way that it's affected young people's attention span, the way that the average teenager, I think now the attention span is less than 10 seconds on average.
I think
sure.
Yeah, I think ours was a whole lot more than that. But
I mean, it's not that we were so much more. That's true. But still, it's like it's continuing to decrease.
Well, I think the place where we have really concrete data is on depression and anxiety.
Absolutely.
For teenagers that are using social media for more than, I think it's 3.5 hours a day. Was it?
Yeah.
Why do you think that is, and why do you think that?
Well, it's primarily. First of all, I think it primarily affects young girls.
Yeah, I can see that,
and that's because they're looking at all of these idealized pictures, and you try to post pictures of yourself and try to see if you can get the most likes and all of that. And so that's not gonna be.
Yeah, and early adolescence is when you start forming that sense of self-worth, your identity. And so if that's now being dictated by what you see on social media, then, obviously, then it's going to start affecting your sense of self-worth.
In some ways, the problem is not even social media. It's just photos. You know what I mean? It's like you're in a world of photos, basically. Yeah. You have a picture of yourself, you pose for the picture, you look really nice, and then you try to see if everybody will like your picture, Well, and then other people send their pictures, and wow, that picture is so good, and it gets like 1,000 likes or whatever,
It's that extra layer that I think is what causes such an issue, though, because if it was just a picture and there was no context around it, that's not really going to do much. But I think it's exactly because of the fact that I'm comparing to other people, to myself. I'm looking I'm in a kind of an invisible rat race to be the most popular and the most liked.
Yeah, and those are the dark origins of social media, Facebook, right? I mean, the
Facebook is what it originally was.
Yeah, I mean, is like his first Zuckerberg's first platform. If I'm, at least according to the movie, I haven't read anything about it, but what is that movie called? The Social Network. It's like, I think the first thing was Hot or Not, something like that. Yeah. You have two people and then you pick who's hot and who's not. So it's basically designed for that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it was based on the idea of like a university yearbook, but like, getting to know the who's who of who's on your college campus. And then eventually they expanded the user base outside of college students, because
and that part is fine, but I mean, I think from the beginning it has this thing where you can select if the person is hot or not. It shows you two images, and then
exactly, and then along with that, like, who's the most popular, who's like, who should I know about, who's not somebody I really need to worry about. Like, that was always something that was a factor there. There was an element of comparison that was there, both in terms of what you're saying and even in other ways. Like,
and so it's like a terribly reductionist vision of a human being that is the basis for this becoming popular and taking off. I mean, I don't think it was necessarily just a profit motive, at least in the beginning. I mean, But then that plays into it too.
Yeah, and
So-
and we've seen this at seminary too. Like when we were off social media, guys itself like experience how much more freer they are. How much more, not addicted. There's like a sense of freedom that you get, and I think even that the former Surgeon General points that out. Like even 4 weeks away from social media showed like significant improvement in like people's perception of themselves, like their wellness, overall wellness as well. So yeah,
exactly. I think if social media were to correct itself, it would have to become more human. It would have to become more patient. There would have to be opportunity for dialogue and genuine human communication. But I think in the form that it has now, I think it is. Well, we know that it leads to depression and anxiety, which is a terrible thing. And I think that regulators, we need to be on top of this.
Yeah, and I think UK, Australia, they've all put bans on social media accounts for adolescents. So there's people are already doing it out in the world, so makes sense.
Yeah.
I wonder if the solution is as simple as a ban. Not to say that it won't have a positive effect for some people, but I wonder if it's a little bit all or nothing, which is a bit of my worry.
I'm not proposing a ban.
Yeah, no. But like for instance, countries like Australia are banning it for adolescents, which I think is perfectly fine and understandable. But at the same time, like I worry if we get too far into an attitude of like, well, nobody should use it, we shouldn't use it. I don't know if I'd condone that. So like we're kind of in this weird state right now where we have the unrestricted access at the moment. How do we avoid swinging the pendulum all the way to the other extreme where just we say like, okay, nobody should be on this. Yeah. It's just bad.
So one aspect is the depression and anxiety, right? The other aspect is just straight up addiction, pure and simple addiction. I worked with young people and to try to help them break the addiction of social media. And it's so hard that it's not even enough that they put a lock on, a timer or whatever, the 30-minute thing, because then they will actually just go in and extend it. They'll go to the settings and extend it because they can't stop themselves. And this is just Instagram. I believe TikTok is much more addictive than even Instagram. And so then sometimes I have to help people say, okay, give the code. There's an app where you can put a pin or something and give the pin, have somebody else put the pin in so that you can't get around it, So we're talking about something that's extremely addictive. And I say that because we should probably use the same principles that we use for dealing with addictive substances to regulate, I'm especially talking about minors, regulate the usage of social media by minors.
Oh, wow.
What do you think that would look like?
Well, it could be a ban like alcohol. It could be, I don't know. No, but I personally, I actually think that it needs to be something related to the algorithms, such as that the companies can't employ algorithms on minors. So, for example, if they can have something like a straight communication network where you can talk to people and interact with people and stuff like that. But at least part of it, because I don't believe that it would be as addictive or even addictive at all, perhaps, if it wasn't for the algorithms.
I think you make a fair point. I think it's also important to clarify what the algorithm is and what it does. Because I've seen even content creators, especially on YouTube, people always like talk about the algorithm as if it's like an ethereal, like, I don't know, like spiritual entity.
It almost is.
Right? It's an apt comparison. But the reality is it's not. It's basically almost like a kind of a search engine, but it's really just tailored to, like, as you mentioned before, tailored to all these personal data elements of you specifically, how you're engaging the platform and how you're not, and your personal information, and then it's trying to curate the content for you. So it's a bit tricky, because what the algorithm is doing on the side of, let's say, a person who's making content, is basically it's trying to give us sort of I'll say like a software solution to helping your material reach the people who are going to enjoy it most, which on paper, it makes perfect sense. It sounds sensible. The issue is that they're too good at it now. Like, it's too much. It's too personalized. It's too addicting. So, removing the algorithms like from the platform,
Saying put a regulation on the algorithm?
I don't think it makes sense to just say like, okay, we're going to remove it, because it's kind of like saying we're going to remove Google search. Like,
no, I don't think they're the same.
Well,
because you can use Google search as an anonymous user, and it still works great.
Well, I think that's what it could go to, is if you have a way to depersonalize the information that's being fed into the algorithm, then I think it is a little more tame.
Yeah. So then who decides?
But that's what we primarily mean by the algorithm. See, like of course, every software uses an algorithm, but when people refer to the social media algorithms, it's like I said, it's about hacking your brain. It's about paying attention to every single behavior you make on there. It's more than personal information. It's every single behavior that you make on there that factors into a statistical model of what you would be most likely to spend time on.
Are you talking like how fast you scroll, how fast you like it?
Yeah, everything. Retention time.
Yeah,
I mean,
and that's I think that's the dangerous part for me, right? Like, it's like, yeah, it's like what we talked about. It's like hacking your brain, or like, just tapping into that reward part of your brain, and then just like using that again and again.
Yeah, and actually that works against me. It's not for me. It works against me, because I don't want somebody to give me the thing that gives me the greatest rush.
Yeah.
Even a person, if there's a person who is doing that to you, you know what I mean? That doesn't make that the best interaction.
Right.
Because the most enjoyable things in life are substantive, and they require patience, and there's an enjoyment that comes through some labor. You know what I mean? And this totally destroys that element. So
yeah, and we know intuitively, like, you can't survive on a diet of pure sugar.
Yeah. Yeah. Good comparison.
Yeah. Or anything else like in a similar vein. I guess to the point we were talking about, I would say it's a little bit tricky to just remove the algorithms, but is there a way we can somehow revert it back? Is there a way that somehow we can make it, which I think is beneficial to everybody? Because the other big concern with all the social media algorithms is invasions of privacy and social engineering, like the more political sides of the whole situation. And I don't think that, well, if we are able to roll back some of this stuff that's been implemented, it benefits those areas of the debate too, because
but I think for an adolescent, it wouldn't. I wouldn't see how for an adolescent though that would be. Why do they even, why do you want to even expose them to that part of it? There's a part of it's gonna hack your brain. What is it that we're seeing that would provide for them?
Could you clarify what
like
you mean?
What is the advantage? Is it worth it for an adolescent to go through all this?
To go through all of what?
Social media and all this trouble of reverting it, rather than just, when their brain's being formed, when they're being developed, when their sense of self-worth and identity is being formed, what advantage would it be there for them to use social media?
No, I think for someone who's adolescent and in formative years, there's not much question to me that things have to be like really scaled back. They have to be really, really like limited in some way. But I when we're talking about it in general, kind of on like a societal level, like, yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like, to be honest, even at this stage, Facebook is kind of on the way out. Facebook is not seen as, it's certainly not seen as cool anymore, but for most people, it's like increasingly irrelevant.
Yeah.
And that's just the nature of the game. Like, we don't know what social media will even look like 5 years from now. Of course, we're living in a time where TikTok's status in the United States is kind of precarious. I remember 5 years ago, Snapchat was a lot more irrelevant than it is now. And I mean, who knows if like what's going to happen with Twitter/X. So all these things are very shifting realities too. But that's where I think, well, basically back to what we were saying before, come back to a sense of how do we manage this? How do we regulate it?
And I'm a big fan of X because for multiple reasons. One is that because people actually type, they say something, you know, they say some thought or some idea at least, rather than just posting pictures. And the other reason is that I like it is because Elon Musk has, one of the first things he did was take the algorithm open source so that it can be improved and evaluated by people. And obviously one of the reasons for that was that when you control a social media platform, you can, again, hack in the brain, you can control how people think.
Right,
by
social engineering.
Yeah, by choosing what kind of content is fed to people.
Right.
And so it's actually very dangerous. I mean, from a social, political point of view. So, you know, I think those are some inspiring things that can be done to improve it. But anyway, I think as an individual, how about that? So we can't necessarily solve all the world's problems because nobody's going to listen to us and change all of these things, you know? No, I'm just kidding. Sort of half. But
to all our listeners.
But, you know, I'm a strong believer in doing what you can to thrive even in a broken system, because most of the time the system will be broken.
Yeah, and you can't wait on the system to catch up.
Yeah, exactly. So how do we ensure healthy relationship to social media at an individual level, or even people that we work with?
Anthony, you want the PIN code for my phone? It's going to be different from person to person, but it reminds me a lot of the way we talk about other addictive, or even if not addictive, like very attachment-prone things. TV, drinking, video games. None of these things are inherently good or evil. And really, you could make an argument for all of them have some good in them.
Yeah, right.
So when I think about it on an individual level, especially if I'm like somebody who's trying to, I don't know, counsel somebody else who's trying to figure out their relationship with social media, I think, of course, I have to take inventory of myself and, okay, what are my habits? How do I use it? What kind of, does it have control over me, or do I have control over it? But I think it's going to be different from person to person. I think there's just some people who just have to say, you know what, I can't be on this at all. Or I can't be on this at all right now because I don't have the maturity or the self-control that I need, which takes a lot of self-awareness.
That itself is extraordinary self-control.
Yeah.
Yeah. And even being aware of that.
Yeah. And even wanting to make that step is huge. But then I think for other people, it looks very different. I mean, of course, like I have people in my family who've worked in communications. So like their job is to be on social media. And so, and even in the realm of the church and of ministries, social media is just taking more and more place in evangelization efforts of different kinds. Yeah. So somehow, I think it really is about knowing oneself. Where do I fall in this? Where is this benefiting me? And do I just need to be away from this for a while? Yeah. Just to see more clearly.
I'm a big fan of data, you know, because
data's cool.
Yeah, data is great. Like, that's part of, cognitive behavioral therapy. one of the key components of it is collecting data so that you're not just going off of your subjective impression of how you're doing with regards to something. So that's why, like I was saying, sometimes when I work with younger people, the first thing is I just say, let's look at your usage, because the phone actually tells you how much you're using. Screen time.
Yeah. Such a great addition. Actually.
It is a great addition. And one of my little pet peeves is I'm not a fan of screen time as a measurement, because a screen is just a medium, and it depends on what you're doing on the screen. And even like cognitively in every way, it depends on what you're doing. Obviously, if you're reading a book on a screen, it's very different. So, but specifically, like how much time did you spend on Instagram app and such, And I mean, I don't force anybody. I just say, would you like to do that? And usually they're like, yeah. So when you open it up and you're like, oh, I spend 4 hours a day on Instagram, and I've been feeling like I don't have any time, and I've been really busy. And it's like, okay, what if we can cut that in half? Imagine that you get 2 more hours every single day. You know what I mean? So I like data for myself as well. I like to do time data on myself. For me, it's not so much through the phone. I have to measure it myself because it's not everything I do is on the phone. I use Clockify, and maybe every roughly 2 years or so, I do that. And I like to look at where am I spending time and then make adjustments, So I think I haven't had a problem with social media because I don't use a lot of social media, but I will say that there is a danger with news, including through X, because mainly what I get on there is like news. And also I get something called Science Daily, which is very addictive because they'll have like 100 things every day that people have discovered. It's like, where do you draw the line here, folks? So, I think there has to be some, I probably need to work on some boundaries there myself.
On Science Daily, everyone has their own addiction.
Right, exactly. No, and there's something in human nature where, you break one attachment and then you realize you have another, or you form another. So like at one point in my life, when I was much busier and had to balance, manage my time very carefully, I had a goal to gradually reduce my screen time in general, aside from things like texting and stuff. Like I was talking about like internet use and social media use and watching videos. My goal was to get that screen time to be lower than the amount of time I spent praying every day, which at that point I was into liturgy of the hours, I was going to mass, I had a holy hour. So that clocked in at roughly maybe, let's say, like hour and a half or so each day, roughly speaking, maybe a little more, maybe a little less. And I actually was getting pretty good at it. Like over the course of a few months, every week, my goal was just incrementally just 5 minutes less each week. So every day just lowered the total amount of screen time by 5 minutes week after week after week.
Pretty incredible.
And I discovered that the lowest you can reasonably get is about 40 minutes. That's about the lowest, that was like the lowest threshold I could hit. Anything below 40 minutes was like an exceptionally busy day, or it was a day where I didn't have my phone anywhere near me. Oh, wow. But like just average amount of time was that. What was funny was that I didn't count like Google searching and like reading articles and stuff as like towards that screen time. So by the end of that time where I was down to 40 minutes, I was spending an hour additional time reading Wikipedia articles and like searching.
It's not necessarily a bad thing though.
Yeah. Well, it's reading, but to the point of just having different attachments, it's like I got attached to that thing, and then I had to.
You form better and better attachments.
Yeah. Well, I guess you could say it's falling forward. They're not equal.
Yeah.
But there's definitely, that was when I became very aware of the fact that, okay, I'm doing this because I'm bored. I'm not doing this because I'm trying to like learn something valuable.
Okay.
I'm doing this out of boredom. So how do I would say like it was falling forward, but there was still room for improvement after that.
I think it's also like, it's good to even acknowledge like even getting off of this it's really hard, for,
Yeah.
you can,
Yeah.
like, why do we do doom scrolling, or why do we want this instant gratification? Obviously, we know the better choice is not to do this,
Good
but
point. Yeah.
yeah, but I think there's even acknowledging that, and it's a rough place to be in. It's like what you said, it's like an addiction, and so, like, yeah, we don't want to, like, yeah, you get what I'm saying, right?
You don't want to guilt trip anybody.
Yeah.
And the thing is, like, when if you're using it for 4 hours a day, when you stop using it, life is slow and dull and boring.
Yeah.
And similar, I think, with people who have video game addictions, regular life can just seem so uninteresting, and it's hard to be motivated, maybe hard to get up,
Yeah.
hard to get moving.
No, you really have to cultivate an interest in life.
You do, but I think you also just have to detox, because
Yeah.
I mean, it's the same with any addiction, right? If you're an alcoholic, you want to get interested in life, certainly, that's key. But you're not going to just be able to have that same level of a high from life
Yeah.
that you do from your addiction.
Yeah.
First, you just have to kind of detox and go through the boredom a little bit, reduce the baseline, and to where you can actually have patient pleasures again.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, and it is, I guess, a cultivation of habits in a way, like it is detoxing and then getting beautiful, getting into what is true, what is good, what is beautiful. But, it's also like there is also the sense of I want that instant gratification. I want that, what I had before. And the alternative sometimes doesn't look great. We're not always in the sense of awe and wonder every single day in our lives. And, sometimes it's just like grinding through the day or feel, experiencing boredom for hours of the day. And, would you rather have that, or would you rather have the, what you had before? And I think it is hard. It is hard, generally hard.
Yeah.
One thing that I think is important to acknowledge, just for whoever might be watching or listening who really feels like, oh, I use social media too much, or this is really wrecking me, or whatever that situation might be, is it's to some degree like this game has been rigged against you. There are people who are, as you mentioned, Father, like trying to hack your brain and take advantage of you. And it's good to acknowledge that. And at the same time, to not fall victim to circumstance, and to say, like, there's a way out of this, and I can do something about it. I can make a change. I can start somewhere. And of course, there's so many resources out there for helping beat addictive habits. So many. And I feel like they always come up around Lent. There's like Exodus 90 and...
Exodus 90. That's actually a good one to bring up. Yeah.
Yeah. And so many others. But of course, Exodus 90, I think part of why it's so successful is because they recognize the importance of having they call it a fraternity, which is really just a support group. And I'll never forget watching this video that was on some experts on the subject of addiction, and they were talking about different kinds of addictions, like substances and sexual addictions. But one of the things that one of these experts had said was a lot of people think that the opposite of addiction is sobriety, when it's not. The opposite of addiction is communion, meaning community, being in union with other people, because the real lack that we experience when we have these really, really addictive patterns and behaviors is there's a feeling of lack in me. There's like something in me that feels like unfulfilled, and I need to fill it, even if it's with something shallow. And so the breaking of that comes through like bonds with other people. And that was he was just speaking on a psychological level.
That's a great point.
Yeah, and it's beautiful, and it's deeper than psychological. It's like the Lord actually made us we're made in God's image and likeness. We're made for communion. And ultimately, the closer that you get to that in life, to experiencing true communion, the more fulfilled you'll be, because that's how you're made. And the further you're away from it, what we would maybe typically call worldliness, or the spirit of the world, which is like where your life is obsessed with money or with fame or with pleasures, and your humanity is reduced to that, you're going to be unfulfilled and depressed.
Isn't it ironic, though, that we're having this conversation when talking about social media, like a technology that was designed to help us like form connections with each other.
Yeah, form real meaningful connections.
Right. And it's becoming the opposite. It's actually making us feel more isolated and driven further apart. So like, I don't want the takeaway to be like, don't use social media, but also like,
wouldn't be the worst thing, but
let's not mistake like, I mean, but
the specific language you use though, isn't it amazing? I don't know if you remember this, but in Gaudium et Spes, the pastoral constitution from the Second Vatican Council, which is like probably 1965 or something, somewhere around there. They actually talk about how the world is becoming increasingly more connected, and yet people are feeling more alone and isolated. In the 60s.
1965.
I mean,
right.
That was like, 40 years before the internet?
Yeah.
I mean, it's wild.
Yeah.
That's prophetic.
Yeah, and so many things that they mentioned too, like the world's becoming more technologically advanced, and yet our moral advancement is actually receding, like in a lot of ways.
I mean, even in there, it's like man finds himself not just by sincere gift of himself to others, but also like in communion with others, and it's in community where he finds himself. So
that's interesting. See where our conversation has led, which I think it inevitably had to lead to, which is that. Okay, how do we conquer this social media phenomenon? Well, we return to our anthropology, the way that God made us, and then we have to live out of that place, which first and foremost means living in love, right?
Yeah, and there's having a network, and then there's having a community. There's a sense of connection with other people, but then there's the actual experience of communion, belonging, like the wholeness that comes only through living in relationship with God and with other people. That's, of course, something that social media can never sell to you. And so I guess maybe to kind of wrap a bow on the whole thing, my general philosophy when it comes to technology is technology does its best when it extends some element of our human experience, and technology tends to fall apart when it tries to replace some element of our human experience. So I think for many of us, or many people we know, we've seen how social media becomes a replacement for connection, replacement for this very critical, crucial core element of our human experience. And I think that if there's a way where we can engage social media individually and societally, where it's extending community and extending communion, then I think we've reached a healthy point. But as long as it's something that is isolating and is actually driving me further away from other people, then I think it'll continue to be a problem. Even if we take all the algorithms away, even if we demonetize all the companies, like it'll still, that core element will still be a problem. It's like I'm using this to put myself in isolation.
And just to be reminded that technology is at the use of the human person, like it's a human person who's puts technology to use for the good of society and for himself as well. Yeah. So I think it's a fair point. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you guys for this. I guess that was pretty cool to talk about this topic with all of you. So thank you guys for joining, and thank you to our viewers for listening. We'll see you guys on our next episode.
All right.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the In Spirit podcast. In Spirit is an initiative of Amoris Christi, an apostolate dedicated to lay spiritual formation. For more information and to keep up to date, you can visit our website at amorischristi.org and follow us on social media.